Oil is Libya's lifeline, but now it's a source of further tension. Parliament sacked Prime Minister Ali Zaidan after a tanker escaped from a port held by militias. The move only worsens the already complicated situation there. Post-Gaddafi Libya and the struggle over oil wealth. This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. More political instability in Libya. The country's former prime minister has fled after being voted out of office by parliament. His departure comes despite Libya's state prosecutors saying Ali Zaidan was banned from leaving because of an investigation into financial irregularities. Zaidan lost a confidence vote after a North Korean ship loaded with oil from a rebel-held terminal escaped from the Navy. A huge embarrassment for a government trying to rebuild its army since Mohamed Gaddafi was overthrown in 2011. The problem is many militia groups actively armed during the uprising remaining out of government control. The dispute over the North Korean tanker is part of a wider struggle for power and security in Libya. The central government has little authority over the country and isn't able to effectively enforce the law or build strong institutions. As a result, political killings, assassinations and kidnappings are common, and some 1,200 people have been killed nationwide over the last 2 years. One of the main problems lies in the government's failure to rein in separatist militia groups in the east of the country. They've seized 3 major ports since August and were even responsible for kidnapping the then Prime Minister Ali Zaidan in October. And the lack of security has left Libya's porous borders unchecked. Thousands of weapons have made it into the hands of fighters in Mali and to Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. Oil production has tumbled in Libya since the revolution, and that's having a hugely damaging effect on the economy in a nation where oil makes up 95% of state income. John Hendren reports from the oil port of Zawiya.
Libya's lifeblood is pouring at a trickle. Oil wealth doesn't just drive the cars on Libyan roadways and the ships at Tripoli's ports, it fuels everything. From the craftsmen in the souks to Libya's fragile government itself, nearly entirely funded by oil revenues and now in the red. For 6 months, armed groups have blockaded the nation's major oil ports, demanding autonomy for eastern Libya, higher salaries for oil workers, and accusing the national oil company of corruption.
If the military were to go in and secure those compounds and there was fighting, could be a disaster.
Yeah, could be a disaster. This is what we should, as a government, we should try to avoid it.
The blockades have sent oil production plunging from 1.4 million barrels a day last year to 230,000 barrels a day now.
Because Muammar Gaddafi controlled the main source of wealth here for so long, no one really knows what impact oil revenues could have on the daily lives of Libyans. And they never will until oil production sites like this one all around the country are at full capacity.
Extreme population-wise, talking about from 5 to 6 million, and annual income from oil and gas not less than 40 billion US dollars a year. So you can do a lot to have a good life to the Libyan people.
Libya's government leaders warned in August they would not be patient for long.
The government finds itself in a dilemma whether to use force and spill blood, which is very dangerous, or just negotiate with those who are doing this. And so far, negotiation seems to be the norm. And the fear is that if you start the shooting, you may not be able to stop it.
So, 6 months into the oil blockade, there is still no resolution.
Are you frustrated?
You can say that. Yeah.
With a near standstill of oil production, the government has voted to raise the salaries of striking oil workers who've joined the blockade. But it can't afford to pay the raise. John Hendren, Al Jazeera, Zawiya, Libya.
Well, joining me now to discuss this are our guests. From Dublin, Fatima Hamrouche, a Libyan politician. She was the first female health minister appointed by former Prime Minister Abdurrahim El-Kaib. And from Nottingham, Mohamed ElBaradei, blogger for Foreign Policy magazine and a political commentator. Welcome to you both. Let's begin with Fatima Hamrouche. It's all about oil the last few days, but it's also about a state with no control. Would you agree?
Yes, I do agree. The problem is this has been ongoing for the last 3 years. Initially, even before the revolution, it was always central control, but now there is no control, neither central nor peripheral, to be honest. The only control is for the armed militias who are dictating their own rules and laws. There is no law. It's a lawless country at the moment. Nobody can deny this. And all the institutions are completely paralyzed because of this.
Well, Mohamed ElBaradei, your view on this. We've heard that outline, a very bleak outline. There is no control whatsoever.
That's the way it's pointing, and this is the only way we can actually see it. And throughout the last year, actually, not just the last 3 days, the one direction that Libya has been pushing to is one of disintegration, one of civil strife, one of polarization. The country and the leadership in Tripoli lacks a national strategy or a national strategy to deal with the political, the economic, and the security, most importantly, the security challenges. And the last 3 days have proven that for some of the politicians in Tripoli, it has become personal. The sacking of Prime Minister Zaidan has nothing to do with the national interest of Libya or Libyans anymore. It has to do with very narrow-minded political gains and sometimes personal egos. And this is why I think all of the decisions that have been made, especially in the last few months, have always been characterized to be the wrong decisions by Tripoli, and they are the decisions that have brought us to this point in Libya, a point where we have forces from Misrata and forces from Barqa fighting each other in Sirte. This is what Gaddafi predicted, and this is what Saif Gaddafi predicted would happen if they were removed from power.
Well, I'll get into, if I may, Mohamed, I'll get into the issue about the militia groups in a moment, but Fatima Hamrouche, I just want to ask you to pick up on what we heard there, that it is becoming personal. The politics in Tripoli and the central government are personal. It took 124 votes to cast out the Prime Minister. That had been resisted for a number of occasions before. But what tipped the balance in this place? Was it personal that the Prime Minister was fired?
In a way, it was personal, but I must also add to Mr. Mohamed's talk that the Muslim Brotherhood are in a struggle for power in Libya. And that was from the start of the Arab Spring, if we may still call it Arab Spring. So Zaidan was vocally against Muslim Brotherhood, especially after the Egyptian change, when the Morsi has gone off power. And Zaidan showing his support to the new government in Egypt, Mr. Sisi's, and being vocal about personally against Muslim Brotherhood, it turned it into a personal issue. But it's not totally personal, in my opinion. I do agree there is a degree of that. But in general, it's actually a struggle for power. Zaidan also has a problem that his government was very weak, and I wouldn't say anyone in his position would have a strong government, because the tools to make this government strong enough is the people, and the people are not helping much because of a lot of hindrances. I was in a former government before him, and we had the same trouble. There is a lot of lack of ethics, lack of a lot of corruption, and that, of course, pulled him back. Nonetheless, there are other mistakes that he's done as well that were taken against him and made it, his enemies, if we may call them, found a reason to get back to him. But the whole thing wasn't really done in the proper way. I agree, yeah.
Well, let's go back to Mohamed ElBaradei to pick up at that point that you were saying about the militia. Now, in particular, what we've seen over the recent months is the rise of the CPB, the Cyrenaica Political Bureau, a group led by Ibrahim Jathran. Now, the very title of that organization implies secession. It's the name of one of the old kingdoms of Libya, pre-Gaddafi. Is this a move to secession, do you believe?
I do not believe it is a movement to secession. If they wanted to secede from Libya, or if they wanted to separate from Libya, they would not be calling for the 1951 constitution. That's their main call. It's a constitution that united Libya. So to say that they are trying to separate, but at the same time calling for the 1951 constitution is not accurate. So it's not a separation movement. It's more of a federalist movement that has taken a turn to the worse. And the reason for that is the lack of dialogue. When the federalist movement sprung up in early 2012, they were accused of being traitors by Mustafa Abdel Jalil, then the chairman of the NTC, by government officials and so on. So Libya, since from the start, Libya did not, or the officials in Libya did not adopt an approach of dialogue, an approach where they can speak to the concerns of the people rather than attacking them straight away and calling them traitors. Because the authorities in Libya at the moment are not in a position to create enemies or to attack anyone. So it's better to adopt an approach where dialogue takes precedence. And it is important to emphasize here that dialogue does not mean appeasement, does not mean giving them what they want. Dialogue is rather more about building bridges of trust and making sure that all the groups are heard and brought together on one table.
But in this particular point, it would appear to be somewhat opportunistic. Ibrahim Jathran, the head of the CPB, was a former head of the Petroleum Facilities Guard. That was his job, to protect the facilities that his group has now taken over. Fatima Hamrouche, this concept now of people who were in positions of trust within government are now leading militia groups, seizing what should be the assets of government. This goes beyond the merely political. It becomes almost bandit territory, does it not?
Well, I don't agree with them behaving in this fashion, but it's a lack of trust. And there is a point that Mr. Mohammed has raised right now regarding the dialogue. He's fully right about this. The lack of dialogue is the main cause of all what we are in at the moment in Libya, including from the beginning of the first days of the revolution. There is a lot of misunderstanding. A lot of people have died fighting for the same cause, thinking they are enemies to each other. But going deeper into the subject and talking to the other side, I am involved at the moment in a major program in Dialogue for Reconciliation, and it shocked me to hear the other side telling me that they are thinking the same way. We fought for the same reason. And that's painful. So many have died, and so many are still dying because of the lack of dialogue. I am very, I don't like calling them militia, but that's the right word, to be honest, when we talk about the armed militias. Don't have a trust in anybody, thinking that the other side is against them. But this has to be corrected by sitting with the people and listening to them and being heard as well. Some of them, let me add another thing, some of them are actually criminals, and this is the problem, because during the first days of the revolution, a lot of criminals have been released from jail, the criminal jails, around 16,000, and they were never put back in jail, never reviewed. Their sentences were never reviewed. Some have martyred as well, and that's what made it hard in the beginning to do anything. But I think it wasn't the right decision not to look into that. And in fact, when the army and police was, when there was the recruitment was open, nobody looked at the background of these people. It was offered to whoever wanted to not to lay their arms and hand them over to the government. they're welcome to be joining one of these powers. And now a lot of them are within the army and the police of the country. And what do you expect from these ones? Of course, they don't want any law in the country. They don't want any dialogue, because that will bring them back to jail. And in addition to this, our original army, the well-trained army, nobody can deny there was a trained army unless somebody wants to deny reality and facts. They are all put aside, and they are to be replaced by this. This is a total chaos, and I called for it to be.
There is a replacement, it would seem. I want to return to the point that Mohamed ElBaradei made right at the beginning, is that now competing militias are moving in. There is ongoing battles now in Sirte, but these militias that are coming from other areas to engage the CPB are in fact not soldiers. They are militia groups aligned with the central government at present. In other words, they are fighting the central government's fight, which in a way undercuts the honesty of a central military force in the first place, does it not, Mohamed ElBaradei?
Absolutely. And to give you an example, the same militias that were called upon by Abu Sahmain 2 days ago, the GNC president, are the same militias that besieged the government buildings to push for the political isolation law. So these very same militias were a year ago undermining the legitimacy of the same government they are obeying orders. It is not, in Libya at the moment, it's not about rule of law, it's not about democracy. All of these concepts are inapplicable in Libya. It is all about a power struggle that's shaping up now and is taking a different direction. After the General Congress elections, the battle was between the liberals or the nationalists and the Islamists. Because of the failure of the nationalists or the liberals to organize themselves, and because they were outmaneuvered by the Islamists in the GNC, the battle is now taking a different approach. It is becoming tribal against Islamists. That's how the battle is actually moving in Libya. Tribal-based militias against Islamist-based militias. And all of the other forces in Libya will align themselves in accordance to this divide. And this what the next few months will bring to Libya. But just to emphasize the point that you made, they are militias, both the ones that GNC is sending to retake the oil port, and both and the ones that are occupying the oil ports and terminals are all militias. They are ideologically driven. They are not professional, and they are actually linked to politicians within the General National Congress anyway.
Well, that's the point. That's the point that I would like to go with Fatima Hamrouche with. The linkage of these militia groups to politicians who are sitting in Tripoli, members of parliament, members of government. The government has used as an excuse that it is attempting to bring the militia under control, yet many critics contend that there are those in government, there are those in parliament who are actually directing the activities of the militia. Your view of that, Fatima Hamrouche?
Yeah, I agree with it, and I tell you, there is an order there that's very peculiar. You know, the supreme leader of the military forces is the head of the GNC. All right, the chief. Now he can give orders, and like what happened now, the armed militias that are coming from the west, and at the moment they are having a fight in the middle of between the west and the east. They have been given order by the chief, by the supreme leader of the military forces, which is the head of the GNC. However, the chief of staff is the actual head of these forces, but the orders from the GNC heads bypass him. So he had no say in sending these. In fact, he came out on TV and said, I didn't want them to go. Now, the Minister of Defense, who has now been appointed instead of Zidane, Mr. Zidane, as the Prime Minister, has no power on any of this. And you can see this, even it's hard to conceive. You need to write it down and think who is who is controlling who? But the reality, which everybody in Libya knows, that none of these are controlling these powers. In fact, they do what they want. The Libya Shield and there's something called the Libyan Revolutionary Room of the Libyan Revolutionaries. They are both sister powers, basically, of militias, and they dictate what they want. In fact, they take actions, and then to cover up for their whatever mistakes or actions, the chief of staff or somebody else comes and issues a decree or says we send them. But the reality is it's them who decide what to do.
Mohamed ElBaradei, if I may just go to Mohamed ElBaradei on that particular point, and I want to pick up on something you said, that the Prime Minister has been replaced by the Minister of Defence, Abdallah Al-Thani. Now, there appears to be a degree of cynicism in this, almost. A person who is powerless, as we've heard from Fatima Hamrouche. There does appear to be no real attempt to engage this crisis, rather just to gloss it over. What's your view, Mohamed ElBaradei?
Absolutely, and I will repeat again, some opponents of Zaidan were actually driven by personal reasons, and this is why they only voted Zaidan out. This is the point. They only voted the Prime Minister out, but they did not vote the cabinet out. They did not vote the whole government out. The whole government stays in place. So it was more about removing Zaidan rather than anything. And I will give you an example of how silly some of, I'll use the word, silly some of the GNC members have been. They told a Western journalist that it doesn't matter who comes after Zaidan. Even if it was Tom or Jerry, the cartoons. This is how careless some of our GNC members have been. Zaidan was voted out not in the national interest. Zaidan was voted out because he was anti-Islamist agenda, and his opponents, which are mainly the Islamists and the Muslim Brotherhood, have been working. This is not the first attempt, by the way, to vote him out. This was the 6th attempt, I think, or the 5th attempt to withdraw confidence from Zaidan, and it only succeeded after 5 attempts. Now, this underscores the fact that the decisions that we've seen taken over the last few months are not in Libya's national interest. They are rather about very narrow-minded political interests.
Well, on that point, Mohamed, if I may, I just want to go to Fatima Hamrouche to pick up on something you've said. The defense minister is in on a temporary basis. In 2 weeks, they say, a new prime minister. That will be the 5th prime minister in a couple of years. Is there any government that you could go back to and operate in? What do you think ultimately needs to be done to make Libya functional, central government functional?
I'm still going back to dialogue. Dialogue is important. In fact, we have no other way to correct what's happened and to build bridges between Libyans except by dialogue. Without that, we're going to remain divided, and its division is what the enemies of Libya feed on.
Mohamed ElBaradei, very quickly,
it's all said from...
Is dialogue enough?
Is dialogue enough? At the moment, it looks like nothing is enough, to be honest. But there is consensus and agreement, even among the international partners of Libya, that dialogue is the only way that things could move ahead. And dialogue is the only way that we can build bridges of trust between the different factions that are fighting. But at the same time, dialogue, we need to ensure that dialogue is not about appeasement or giving everyone what they want. It's more about finding compromises and making sure that the decisions that are taken are in Libya's interest and not in the interest of certain groups.
Well, at that point, thank you so much to my guests, Fatima Hamrouche in Dublin and Mohamed ElBaradei in Nottingham. And thank you for watching. You can join in this discussion online at Facebook and Twitter. I'm Mike Hanna. Goodbye for now.